Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Timothy Graham and I'll be your speaker for tonight. I am currently based in Canberra and work for the Civil Aviation and Safety Authority. These particular pictures here is of myself slope soaring my 2 metre Radian Pro, my quarter scale super decathlon, and another slope soar of a ME109. Here we have my two beautiful children. I think this was taken last year at one of our half-scale mammoth Aeronautics. The picture, that particular aircraft is a half-scale Pawnee that is used to tow up a half-scale, I think it was a K-17 glider. So there's another picture of there of a Global Hawk, 25 metre wingspan, 14 tonne TOH, capable of flying around about 24 hours endurance, and another in construction electric glider with a 2 metre balsa wing. So just my embedded video didn't really want to work today, so I'm hoping to put this on the other screen, but it's not wanting to work. So the future is here, everybody. Ice cold beer on an ice cold lake. Now that ad was made before the FAA had commercial ARPAS regulations in place, and this particular company got in trouble for conducting a commercial operation and subsequently were fined for various misbehaviours at the point in time, mainly flying within 30 metres of somebody and beyond visual line of sight. Now, as keen aviators, I thought you would take some humour in this and that we all like some sort of stability in our aircraft. Good. Does anybody know who the mystery dollar bill represents? Bill English? So what we're going to cover today, we're a little bit about me, some unmanned aviation history, some terminology, some Australian ARPAS statistics. We're going to have a look at Google Wing, which is doing burrito and coffee deliveries in Canberra. Scout Aerial, which is doing a lot of operations in Zimbabwe and Australia, particularly BVLOS ones. And we'll have a look at the Airbus Zephyr, including CAA Vanuatu's latest mission with their vaccine delivery, and an Australian company, Swoop Aero and Wingcopter, is a German company, is participating in those trials. You would have seen the Wingcopter aircraft in DHL colours. I think it's the December issue of Aerospace. and we have a look at a little bit of counter-drone technology as well. So, I'm a local lad, born in Tauranga Hospital in August 1983. Went to Cracker Road Kindy, Pillins Point, I think if I remember rightly. Aeronautical Primary, Aeronautical Intermediate, and Tauranga Boys College. It's myself and my children at another half-scale Aeronautical again, and one of my university pictures from Massey. So my first flight was in a hot air balloon at the Waikato Balloon Festival. Unfortunately, it was only a tethered flight, but it still sort of set in motion a lifelong career in aviation. I attended the National Aviation Scout School twice in fielding and had my first taste of gliding, helicopters and fixed wing flying. After obtaining all my heavy vehicle licenses, I decided I needed to go to university, and I enrolled in the Bachelor of Engineering and then decided that wasn't for me, so I moved on to aviation management, and I loved being a student so much I decided to do my Masters. Just so happened that my thesis supervisor, Dr. Ross St. George, I'm sure some of the guys know of him, ex-CAA-NZ inspector, he said you should apply for this job in Canberra, and I so did, and the rest is history. So I started off in basically the flight operations and licensing section, where I provided research support and analyst support to the flight operations inspectors, both rotary wing and fixed wing. Moved on to the Future Technology and Regulatory Trends branch. So after a restructure, there was a opening to insert into the UAS, or Unmanned Aerial Systems branch. Then another restructure turned into Flight Standards branch, and another restructure turned into RPAS branch. I'm also a member of the National Aeromodeler and Aviator Society, which is a small, relatively small model aircraft club. However, we sort of have varied disciplines, right from 3D helicopter flight to half-scale, mammoth-scale, replica World War I aircraft. I'm the club representative to the State Association and a member of the Canberra branch's Royal Aeronautical Society. So I'd just like to point out that there's a little bit of a spelling mistake. It says Australian division up there, but I'm sure you'll forgive me for that. So I have a remote pilot licence. I was instrumental in the regulations in developing a licence, and went on to get my multi-rotor and fixed wing endorsement. Also have an aeronautical radio operator certificate, also known as an AROC, which permits you to operate an aeronautical radio. I have a PPL theory pass. I didn't complete the flying, however I wanted to prove to myself and to my colleagues that I can at least make it the first step in terms of my private pilot's licence. Have an amateur radio foundation licence as well. Currently studying for my standard licence, and I also did my maintenance controller course right in this room at about 10 years ago, so it's come a long way since then. So what do I do at CASA? So I support the regulation and policy mainly at the RPAS branch. I do a lot of ministerial inquiries, responses to that. When people have policy assessments as well, so when people write into CASA and say, hey, I've got a great idea, why don't you fit propeller cages to drones, and then you can fly closer to other people, and it's to say to them, well, I can't let you do that because of these reasons, and you have to state it nicely. So that's sort of what I'm good at. I was the Secretariat to the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Subcommittee, so that's a collaborative industry body that CASA was consulting with for a point in time until it was resolved and turned into the Aviation Safety Advisory Panel, or ASAP, and under that has a technical working group which feed information into the ASAP, which directly liaises with the Director of Aviation Safety. I helped with the ab initio training syllabus for part 101, so in about, I think it's in end of June or start of June, there will be a change to the regulations. So the Manual of Standards are the equivalent to New Zealand CAA's advisory circulars. Our CAS's advisory circulars are more of guidance, or AMC I think they call them over here. I've provided a lot of support in the new registration and accreditation scheme that CAS has got currently in development. So that means that every single drone that fits the criteria, either being used for commercial use or above 250 grams recreationally and used outside, needs to be registered. And I've provided a lot of drafting support on that side of things. And I also provide communications advice to Switchboard, Safety Promotion and the communications team. So my safety mantra, no less safe than manned aircraft. So that's about, if you love stats, that's 10 to the minus 6 or 7. So it's just above GA, but not quite Part 121 or air transport grade. So what is a drone? Oh, a drone can be many things. It can be an annoying sound. It can be a male bee. It can be parts of a bagpipe, or it can be a remotely controlled pilotless aircraft. So there's many different things, many different names for many different things that could be the same thing. When people say drone, I think of a Phantom 4 or some NQ9 or what's the term? Predator, I think they call it. The old terms are UAV, UAS, unmanned aerial systems. You've got the FPV races, where they're the small quadcopters that have got a camera mounted on the front, and the pilots fly under goggles and fly that way. Typically RC or model aircraft means you flying for sport and recreation. And self-explanatory, a multi-rotor has got more than 2 rotors. As we all know, our pioneers of flight, the Montgolfier brothers, they pioneered the first unmanned aircraft before hopping on board themselves. And in 1918, a Kettering bug, or what it was known as the aerial torpedo, was first developed. Noticed the dihedral in the wings, and made it a very stable platform to fly. And as you saw before, the DH-82, the Queen Bee, which had the wooden fuselage from the DH-60. That's Winston Churchill standing in the shop there. So are drones really that deadly? Some say yes, some say no. They say that a drone strike to a tail rotor would bring down a helicopter. Well, it did. It's that MD-500 there you got in the top left that was filming the Dakar Rally and was subsequently hit by a Phantom 4. Pilot managed to auto-rotate and land safely. Up here we had the C-130 collide with the RQ, was it RQ9? I think it was a Shadow, so a 4 metre wingspan military drone as well. Hit the leading edge. The Hercules pretty much only suffered some scratches. We all know, I don't know if you know about the Army Black Hawk drone sucking a drone through the rotor disc that was able to make a safe landing, and they actually tracked down the pilot of the Phantom by the QR code printed on the motor. So the Army went to DJI and said, who owns this drone? There's a code on this, and they were able to track the owner down, and he received a very, I think it was about $900 fine or something, which he was very lucky to get away with because he was flying beyond visual line of sight and in places where you shouldn't be flying. And the last picture there, Drayton University did some study on impacts into the leading edge. There are some, being an academic, there are some flaws in their research methodology, mainly during that the Mooney wing that they used would never reach 270 knots. So there's been a few close calls that have been recorded on footage. The A380 is, I think, is out of Ireland, if I remember rightly. One down in the corner there, Florida, is it a Jet Ranger 206 or something? 757 out of going into Las Vegas. That one's still under investigation. There's another MD 500 at Niagara Falls. That guy was pretty lucky. It's a designated no-fly zone for drones because there's a lot of manned aircraft that operate around that area, and he just happened to be just above it before it flew under. And this one here was, I think it was 2 years ago, and it was at a surf event, but that's, I don't know if you can see that, but that's a Maverick Pro. That's about 700 grams multi-rotor, and they pretty much used the downwash of the helicopter to push it into the water. So it wasn't an unofficial drone capturing footage of the surface. So out of all the mid-air collisions, only only one of them has resulted in a fatal accident, which is the bottom one here in '97. A model aircraft collided with a grog. The grog was at fairly low level, and it ended up in 2 fatalities. One notable, a couple of ones, there's a balloon up there, glider in Holland. You've probably heard about the one in Quebec with the Beechcraft, the King Air, and we've just talked about the Black Hawk there, and a few other model aircraft ones. So I think the UK ones, the airport, this collision here, the model glider was flying at 650 feet after catching a thermal. So my research I've only managed to find a total of 13 deaths from RPAS or model aircraft. Some flying lawnmowers landed in the crowd at Super Bowl, killing 2 people. We've got the grog mid-air, couple of, unfortunately, some younger children, where the fixed-wing aircraft lost command link and pretty much went dead stick, and unfortunately collided with some children. There was a substantial fixed-wing model display at an air show that crashed into the crowd in Hungary. And we'll look at another one. I've got a picture of a guy that managed to sever his jugular flying 3D or aerobatics with his helicopter. And if you call it paraglider a aircraft, then there's been the paraglider came off second best after colliding with a slope soarer. Some fairly high-ish profile events in Australia. There was a guy flying another helicopter, managed to cut himself. It was quite ironic that he was airlifted out of the park that he was flying his helicopter by an AW101, so helicopters seem to be everywhere, and a drone operator was fined after she collided with a triathlete in Geelton in WA not too long ago, 2014. Unfortunately, this little boy suffered a cut eye from his uncle's drone. Multi-rotor hit the hedge and managed to slice an eye. So if you're ever flying around, flying your multi-rotor around, it's best to wear glasses and give children some safety glasses. And this guy up here was the one that decided to sever his jugular himself with his 3D helicopter. He was doing some particularly stupid things, so notably flying within, I think it was 2 metres of himself. So it was unfortunate, but yeah, not surprising. One of the particular interesting ones, a Phantom managed to take down an R44. I know that they have a sketchy history, the 44s, but you can see here that it's lodged in one of the spray tanks. And this is just a picture of the king here that had a mid-air with a drone. Well, I'd like to point out that the final report, they didn't state that they swab tested the wing. So that, I thought that was quite interesting that they left that out. So drone strikes worse than bird strikes? Some say yes and some say no. However, I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of a bird strike. Okay, on to Airbus Zephyr. So this particular machine flies at around between flight level 450 and 750, I think, if I remember rightly. Used a communication relay, maritime surveillance, that sort of stuff. So flying way above the weather, twice as high as your usual jumbo jet. And it's operating out of WA. So it's 75 kgs maximum takeoff weight, 25 metre wingspan. This thing has got it's very, very light. It can only take off in very fickle weather conditions, so much akin to your World War I fighters. For something that size, it's covered in solar cells. They're aiming for about 90 odd days on a single flight. So how does a regulator certify an operation like this? And the joint airworthiness of rulemaking for unmanned systems have come up with the SORA, or Pacific Operations Risk Assessment. And each particular operation will fit in a particular box. So for under 25 kgs, will fit in the green box, or Cat A, Pacific category, Cat B, or certified category, Cat C. Now the SORA only focuses on Cat B aircraft, where the current certification requirements don't really suit what unmanned aircraft can do. So the SORA is a methodology to assess the risks involved in standard drone operations. And this group has adopted for a holistic approach, so they'll take the ground risk, the air risk, what sort of remote pilots do you have, what sort of testing's been done with the aircraft, what maintenance schedule they have with that particular operator. And not all operations suit the SORA, so it's not a cover-all. It is, if you sort of meet these requirements, then maybe you can use the SORA, and then particularly with CASA and also CAANZ. I think, is it Corey? There's a guy named Corey in the CAANZ. He's involved in the JARIS working group. So if you stumped up in Wellington with your SORA, they'll gladly welcome you with open arms to do weird and wonderful operations. But this is the SORA process. So you do your initial valuation. What's your risk assessment? You do your CONOPS, which is a concept of operations. So you define basically what you want to do, how you're going to do it, and when you want to do it. You determine your ground risk. Is it you're going to be over an urban area? Are you going to be in the middle of the desert? Are you going to be in fjordlands, or etc., etc.? And then you determine your air risk class. Where are you flying? Are you flying below 200 feet, 400 feet, 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet? Is there a VFR corridor nearby on the VTC? Step 4, lethality determination. So this is basically a collision with a third party or human. If you take the Google Wing type operation, it's made out of foam. The aircraft is, I think it was around 7.5 kgs maximum takeoff weight, and that has been described as relatively harmless, and that out of, I think it was 1 in 800,000 collisions with a human, you may get a fatality of, it's roughly, the statistics are roughly about that. Then you move on to the SAIL, or the Pacific Assurance Integrity Levels. So that goes deep down further into the SORA process, determine what sort of barriers, risk barriers, harm barriers you're going to put in place, so to stop you doing certain things, or to enable you to do certain things. For example, we may say, well, instead of doing the operation at daytime, I could do it at night time, because A, there's going to be less people around, and B, there's going to be less VFR traffic around. Step 6, identification of recommended threat barriers, then onto a feasibility check, and then onto a verification of your robust proposed barriers. So do your harm barriers actually work in the real world? And this is an example of the intrinsic UAS ground risk. So first column, up here, you've got a wingspan of approximately 1 metre, total kinetic energy impact less than 700 joules, and then you have your risk class there. So you carry those numbers, so you'll have, there's another table for air risk, and you basically, it's just a big addition exercise, and if your SAIL score comes under a certain number, then you should get a green light to go ahead and do your particular operation. Now moving on, my wonderful mother, who has just come back from Vanuatu, who's sitting in the back row, kindly took this picture for me, and the CAA Vanuatu, along with UNICEF and various other organisations, have organised vaccine deliveries for remote villages. So instead of a mother and child having to take various boat rides and treks across mountainous terrains over 2 to 3 days, a drone can deliver vaccines to individual villages, and therefore only the nurses have to travel to get to the particular child or village. So we've got 2 operators, one Swoop Aero, which is the fixed wing, this one here, and Wingcopter, which you may have seen, as I said before, the DHL colours in yellow on the front of Aerospace magazine. I'm pretty sure it was the December issue. So these are pretty fast aircraft. Vanuatu's geography and lack of infrastructure make drones a useful solution to the problem of delivering medical supplies. Vanuatu consists of more than 80 volcanic islands spread over 1,600 kilometres. Of the 65 inhabited islands, under a third have airfields or roads. And these particular operations operate at 500 feet. So phase one, I must say that my ex-boss, when I was in the Future Technology and Regulatory Trends division, my boss at the time, Jim Coyne, he is now the liaison officer between the CAA, Vanuatu and the two contractors or operators. So he has a very good knowledge of unmanned aircraft systems, and he provided me some of this information. So they basically do a round trip of in the phase one. So this is just the mock delivery operations. So they would load up the aircraft with water vials, and it's used to train the nurses and to get the vaccines out of the drone, liaise with all the villagers so they're not totally scared of what's flying into their village. They've only had one hull loss at the moment that I know of anyway. It flew into the side of a mountain. Apparently it was really poor weather. And there's no TAMs are always issued for these deliveries. So phase two, it's a bit more of a sort of a complicated setup. Some of the further, because of the limitations on the drones and the range, they actually do some island hopping where the batteries are removed and replaced, and then it flies on to, say, for Pentecost Island or Mungo Island. Requires a sort of a stop off to basically have a fresh battery put in. Now closer to my home, my current home at the moment, I still call New Zealand home, Google Wing, and they're currently delivering burritos, coffee, and the top 100 chemist warehouse products. So that's anything from Panadol to Barocca to perfumes and things like that could potentially be delivered to your door. The far picture is just a standard media picture, and I took this picture of closest to me. This is their first trial when they started off in Fernley Park, just doing sort of quick runs across the valley to houses. So Google will give them an app to download, and they would deliver bottled water, chocolate, muffins, that sort of stuff, like bags of sugar and things like that. So there's no more having to go to the neighbours and ask for a cup of sugar anymore. So this is what the Google machine looks like. The little box on the bottom there is made of cardboard, and they call it the pill. And it's lowered down on a tether, and if a dog or somebody else or a small child decides to run out and grab the tether, it will just unwind by itself. It can detect that it's being yanked at, and so that it won't actually cause the aircraft to crash. One of their initial designs was to release the whole winching mechanism, and now they've just gone to just letting the rope roll out. And so there's been 3 trial sites, Fernley Park, Royalla and Benithan. For one Christmas work do, we decided to go have some burritos delivered for lunch. So me, the kids and 2 other members of the branch, we drove out to Royalla. It's about a 20-minute drive from my place, and we got lunch delivered at one of the public delivery points. Yes, it really defeated the purpose of like having to drive out to get your burrito, but it's still the future, experience the future. In the picture of the depot, which is currently under construction in Mitchell, is designed for people to deliver goods to be delivered. So they've signed up Bunnings. So if you, instead of going to Bunnings just to buy 2 or 3 screws, you can call up Google Wing and they'll come and deliver 2 or 3 screws for you. If you notice, there's a second roller door up the top there, and that's where the drone's going to be flying in and out of. So with all these deliveries happening, there's going to have to be some sort of unmanned traffic management system. And I don't know if you remember your childhood and watched the Jetsons, the cartoon, they seem to just fly anywhere they like, and that's sort of what the UTM systems will look like in the future. You designate a pickup or a start point, A, B, C, and a computer will give you a flight corridor. So if we see in the closest picture here, you've got 2 flight corridors. This is what Google Wing use, and once the flight corridor segment's been or used or been transited through, it is therefore deleted or opened up to other delivery drones to access. So it's basically like the highways in the sky concept that Airways New Zealand are doing in your approach into Queenstown. This is sort of more of a permanent / temporary arrangement where one drone will fly a certain corridor and come back, and that corridor will disappear once that delivery's been done. Now, to access airspace around airports, and it's pretty unique that in New Zealand you have a concept called shielded operations, and what that means is that any drone operation within 4 kilometres of any airport, if you're flying below building or tree height, means you can go fill your boots, pretty much, and operate without having to tell air traffic control. However, in the States and in Australia, you've got pretty much a no-fly zone around all controlled airports. In Australia, it's 5.5 k's or 3 nautical miles. And the reason why it's that number is because it's the circling approach for VFR aircraft. And if previous to Gatwick incidents, the UK have increased their no-fly zone from 1 kilometre from the movement area to 5 kilometres. So, how do we access this particular airspace around controlled aerodromes? So the pilot will have a handy app on their phone. The Americans call it Lance, however I like to, when I see Lank there, it's like, it doesn't really have the same ring to it. However, pilots use an app to request a parcel of airspace. That goes on to the FAA, and the FAA liaises with the particular ATC unit at that airport, and then they get fed back an answer through the FAA, and the pilot gets a message on their app saying that they're allowed to fly at a particular time. So different colours mean different heights. I'll just check my notes. Orange is a 100-foot limit. The lighter orange is a 200-foot limit, and the yellow is a 400-foot limit, all AGL. So this is what, on the far image, that's what somebody would, a remote pilot would see on their phone. The middle image is basically all that airspace broken down into the little blocks, and in a colour representation is the closest image to me. Moving on to Scout Aerial Group. Now this particular company has been fairly innovative in their use or the application of unmanned aircraft systems. They've used them for, or they're just starting to use them for clandestine grave detection, so all your war graves or illegal killings that pretty much have multiple bodies in, they're able to detect where they've been buried. They've done a lot of anti-poaching operations in Africa. They've done illegal fishing operations. I don't remember the strait, but it's between Madagascar and the African coast, where big light ships go out and they turn their lights on, and I can't remember the particular type of fish they attract, but they were pretty much overfishing, and they were able to catch them red-handed. And the advantages of using a drone is that the noise signature is a lot lower, so you can't detect them, and you can't really use traditional radar to pick them up either. So they went through Greenpeace and was able to prosecute this particular company, and they face hefty fines. Particularly in Australia, they've been working on shark detection. I was always sceptical about shark detection because there's always sharks in the ocean, and you'll just end up with beaches closed 24/7 if you send these things out. However, that's not the case, and they've actually been fairly successful at this. Environmental monitoring, stockpile monitoring, so that's big mining companies wanting to know how much iron ore is in their particular stockpile, so in that they feed that information on into their logistics and supply chains, where they were able to say, oh yeah, we need so many trucks or so many trains for this particular pile. They can do 3D monitoring. Top image there is the shark detection. The black dot up the top, up there, that's a surfer and shark. These are cattle, so you can do herd counting. This is a magnometer setup, so that sort of detects variations in the Earth's crust. And they also do, I haven't got a picture of it, but they do pothole detection, which I thought would be rather handy in this country. So, going beyond visual line of sight. So there's three considerations that most operations or operators need to consider: is the fare paying passenger, other manned aircraft, and third parties on the ground. And with RPAS, you can pretty much eliminate the fare paying passenger. So your overall risk is your air risk and your ground risk. So, as you all know, risk equals likelihood times consequence. So we've got situational awareness. So that's why people, or like most regulators say visual line of sight operations only, and that gives you the ability to react to any threats that come your way. Also, consequence, your operational environment, not flying over populous areas outside of 30 metres from people, and also what is your RPAS made of, is it being tested, etc., etc. So the basic risk perspective, or for your VLOS operations, is relatively low on both air and ground risk. So in Australia, we call our standard operating conditions basically the normal rules, normal recreational drone rules. So flying one drone at a time, visual line of sight, day VMC, outside of 30 metres from people, not over populous areas, away from fire or emergency services, say like a car accident or a bushfire, and not posing an unreasonable risk to others. But moving on, so the next part is your operating VLOS and your operating outside of the standard operating conditions. So that's within 30 metres. So in Australia, a person that holds what they call a REOC, or a RPA operator certificate, much like a AOC, has the potential to operate closer up to 15 metres of a person, providing that person gives their permission. to operate in that particular manner. So you can apply, in Australia, you can apply to fly above 400 feet in populous areas, depending on what you're operating. You're allowed to operate in controlled or restricted airspace. So that's within 3 nautical miles of a controlled aerodrome or in rated airspace. Additionally, that you can also operate in approach and departure paths of aerodromes, and that sort of gives you, CASA will say, yes, you need to do if you want to do this, you need to do this, that, and the other thing, basically liaise with all the operators of that particular aerodrome, or if it's a controlled aerodrome, the ATC unit. But moving on to EVLOS, which is extended visual line of sight. This predominantly uses a spotter with the remote pilot. So the remote pilot has primary responsibility, and the spotter is there to provide the visual capability of detecting threats to that particular operation. So that's we're increasing risk as we go along with these slides. And now on to BVLOS. So basically, if you want to operate BVLOS in Australia, you will need a minimum of a operator certificate. Your remote pilots will need to have a license, a remote pilot license. They will need to have the radio license, and your company will need to have their exposition or what we call the operator's manual to reflect that particular operation that you want to do. And this operations manual is a reference for the operator and for the regulator to say, this is how we're going to do this particular operation. And if you move outside of this, we're going to whack you with a big stick. Like I covered before, to lower your air risk or ground risk, you may decide to do it at night time. You may decide to move it to the weekend, and this is all about the operator liaising with the regulator and stating, this is how we want to fly and this is how we're going to control our risks. And I don't know about the CAANZ, but I'm sure they're fairly similar, that basically if you can prove to the regulator that you can own your risk, you will be given a permission to operate. So, Flight Authorization Form version 6.03 is the form that you'll need, and you will need to complete that to tell CASA the why, where, what, when or how. And also you'll need to submit your job safety assessment, your aircraft details and your operational details that are of major interest. So there is some challenges to operating BVLOS, and with the lack of airworthiness regulations and certification, it's very difficult to give an operator a green light to operate their new whiz-bang drone in a particular area. And basically, once you've satisfied CASA, they'll, like I said before, they'll give you a green light and you can go on and fill your boots. So with the miniaturisation of electronics, ADS-B units, ADS-B-X can be used in certain situations. You may decide that a FLAM unit would suit your particular vehicle, some sort of data connection with either a satellite or cell phone tower may provide some sort of situational awareness for your aircraft to operate in a particular area. Again, use of the SORA is a widely accepted resource for you to gain permission. And the newer concept of operations is continuing to evolve, so everything's getting lighter, faster, shinier and flashier. One of the sort of the hidden challenges with drones is that, or remotely piloted aircraft, is software assurance, and some people don't even know what that means. So basically it's a level of confidence that software is free from vulnerabilities. So can the system be hacked? Can a firmware upgrade has happened, what's the chance of a bug still being in the firmware? A standard Phantom has more lines of code than your standard Piper Cherokee these days. I think the only lines of code is in the ELT in a Piper Cherokee, if you haven't upgraded it since the 60s. And so you've got millions of lines of code, and so how are you going to check them all? You can't, at the moment there's no spell checker that you can run over your lines of code to make sure that things are going to work as intended. There's airworthiness is another thing that's in development. The JARIS group have developed the light unmanned aeroplane systems, rotorcraft systems component for drones, and that pretty much says if you can prove that your product or something is going to last for X amount of hours, and then after that you're going to change it, then you're good to go, or you get a lower risk rating, and therefore that may permit you, plus all your other risk mitigators, that permission to go operate. So the size of the Australian industry is rapidly growing. When I first started in this space, there was a little over 200 operators, and now there's over 1,500. So the REOC is the equivalent to the, as I said before, the AOC operator certificate. There's over 11,000 remote pilot license holders now. There's a quirk in the Australian rules, which is a segment called the excluded RPA, and this is where you can conduct pretty much low risk operations without having to hold a license or a operating certificate. And I'll cover a little bit more than that. Just under 7% of all license holders are female, and there are 54 registered training organisations that you can apply for to get your remote pilot licence. The typical course takes around about a week. CASA requires at least 5 hours stick time before we'll give you a licence, and costs range from sort of $2,000 to $3,000 depending on sort of what sort of bits you add onto it. Are you going to add on another aircraft or a radio licence as well? So the drone rules in Australia. So you've got pretty much the same rules for sport and rec flyers as you do here. When you're going commercial, if you do not fit in what they call the excluded, just go to the next slide, the excluded category, which is also known as the sub 2 kg or the farmer rule, basically it gives you the ability to access your drone for commercial purposes if it fits in within this finite window. So pretty much if it's under 2 kgs for the sub 2 kg category, and it's within the standard operating conditions, so day VMC under 400 feet, etc., then you do not have to apply for a remote pilot's license or a operator's certificate. However, for the landholders, so this is your farmers, your mining companies, if you can operate within the standard operating conditions, we've given permissions for them to operate a 25 kg, up to 25 kg multi-rotor or drone. And if you want to operate right up to 150 kgs, you'll need a remote pilot license for that last little bit. So, what do RAOC holders get? They get various permissions, and all as dealings with the regulator all come with a cost. So you can operate outside of visual line of sight. You can operate within the 15 to 30 metre circumference of a person, diameter of a person. You can apply to operate in restricted areas. For example, all of Sydney Harbour is either R405 or A or B, and you may operate autonomous aircraft as well, and multiple aircraft at the same time. So I don't know if you've seen the drone swarms or the light shows. They've had up to 100, 200 aircraft all flying off 2 laptops. So the current parts under development at the moment, as stated, the registration and accreditation system, which will sit in part 45, and that will require you to stick a sticker on your drone as well if it meets the standard. There's part 101, which is normal. There's all unmanned aircraft and rockets sit under. That includes kites, tethered balloons, and fireworks. I think much like here as well. And part 117, where it's your duty as a remote authorisation holder, you have to record your flight hours, and if requested, you need to submit it to CASA. Some various other advisory circulars that all cover model aircraft, licensing, and operating an excluded RPA. Just on a side note, this is one of the diagrams that will appear in the latest rule change, a basic lolly wrapper diagram of where you can fly. No flying in the black zones, and that's your, if you're inside of this oval, then you're limited to 150 feet. So the manual standards will be released fairly shortly. We've gone through, I think it's 2 years worth of consultation, and total development times around about 4 years. They'll bring in 2 sort of new concept of operations, the EV Loss 1 and 2, we'll cover that shortly. More information on night operations within 3 nautical miles of controlled aerodrome, so it's more sort of bringing a standardised format to RPA. Ab initio training syllabus, so this will ensure that all training schools teach to the syllabus, a standardised syllabus, and therefore we should get more consistent and safer remote pilots. So EV Loss 1 and 2, as you can see on the diagram here, under EV Loss 1, if you're flying a highly automated drone, say like an EB or something, and you are outside a controlled airspace, you want to do some crop monitoring, all you need is yourself, basically. You can fly up to 5 kilometres away from you, as long as you keep an eye on the airspace. Where EV Loss 2 introduces this observer component, whereas as long as you've got somebody that has eyes on the airspace that surrounds the drone, then you can fly. And beyond that is the EV Loss component. CASA has developed a map. I think it's about 2 years old now. It's very clunky, and it's going to be updated fairly shortly. But it just gives a basic representation on where you can fly and where you can't fly. This is Canberra, so controlled airport. The red zone is a no-fly zone. This is Tinbit-Billa, the satellite, the Deep Space Communications Complex. So that's restricted area, so you can't fly there. this is your CTA where it meets the ground. You can fly here, however you're very restricted to what you can do. Advisory information on helipads. This is the local Canberra Hospital helipad, and the aircraft down here is just a ALA, or aircraft landing area, which gives an advisory that aircraft may operate. It's not a decision-making app or anything, it's just a situational awareness tool. So, on the hunt for rogue drones, the DJI product Aeroscope has been chosen to be trialled by CASA, and this is my colleague Simon Denby in his brand new end of the run Land Rover Defender. When he bought, it's the only car that he's bought that has increased in value, pretty much driving out the showroom. However, you can see the portable units here are 2 Aeroscopes, so they will track down. They will give us the location of an operator and an aircraft at the same time. Because you usually connect a phone or a tablet to your DJI controller, that has a GPS unit in it. That will automatically activate that. It knows where the drone is, and you can send somebody to go and investigate that particular person flying the aircraft. Where permanent units can have a lot more power and can do up to 50 kilometres in range, line of sight. And this is, the trial's currently due to end, I think, in about 3 or 4 months. So yeah, it will be assessed on its merits fairly shortly. And another thing is that it doesn't actually take over the drone, or you can't actually control the aircraft from these units. You can only interrogate the serial number, and once you have the serial number, then you can track who owns that particular drone, because with the Phantoms, you have to register as a pilot before you can turn the machine on. Yes.
Excuse me, Tim, are you going to have attack drones or hawks or shotguns or what? I'm thinking of Gatwick.
Yeah, that's a good point. Queensland Police with the Australian Federal Police did trial the drone gun, as they call it. I don't like to call it a gun because it doesn't really shoot anything except for radio frequency. However, they have used it, and with the Commonwealth Games, that was in Brisbane and the Gold Coast.
Her Majesty's Prison Service used it quite regularly to stop inmates getting drugs into prisons in the UK.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, delivering contraband and all sorts of things. So, what should RPAS or drones do in the future? I don't know if you recognise this picture here, but this helicopter, the police helicopter, crashed into the pub and ended up killing 6 people, unfortunately. So now we're doing highway patrol. It's a perfect operation that a drone could do, because I'd rather 5 kg something or rather crashing through my roof rather than a full-blown helicopter. I don't know if this is a pretty old picture, and I don't know what's happened to this machine, but that's New Zealand Coast Guard UAV. They won the competition that they ran a few years ago. Zipline, they deliver blood products to hospitals in Rwanda. They, instead of, even though the distance between hospitals is fairly short, it may take up to 5 hours to drive 50 k's due to the conditions of the roads. So that's why they've started doing drone deliveries of blood products. Here is a AED, flying out AED in Germany. And this is a US Coast Guard tilt rotor. Recently, if you went to Avalon Air Show, you may have come across this, the Loyal Wingman. It's about 2/3 the size of a Hornet F-18. and it's been developed in Australia along with there's other predecessors in the States at the same, being developed at the same time, and with a range of 2,000 nautical miles. And coming to the end, if you can't get enough of me, I've started a podcast, Drone Musings with Timothy Graham. I'm still learning, so it's fairly dry. I'll just ignore that, it's a mistake. But anyway, so get involved in your local branch, and thank you very much.
Did anyone have any questions for Tim?
Yes, any questions?
What happens if you want to fight the enemy? Can you have, are the drones going to be developed so that they can go and bomb Berlin from a distance?
Yeah,
They haven't done it yet.
No.
No, I don't know, but the Army, Navy and Air Force, there's not much point in having a Navy really.
That's right.
There's not much point in having an Army if it can all be done from inside a...
Also, when somebody says that they're developing an autonomous system, please ask them not to, because a truly autonomous system will have the ability to choose sides at will. So you keep that in the back of your mind, eh?
Thanks for your presentation, Tim. But on the other side, the regulatory enforcement side of things,
Yes.
are the rules that you're developing and have developed, if someone gives the proverbial two fingers, as will happen, are the penalties a deterrent, or is it a bit like here, mobile phones while you're driving, $80, big yawn, police officer put it on my account. It's just a big yawn. Is it strong, punitive measures or not?
Basically, you have to front up with court-based quality evidence. You need a person or a remote pilot with the transmitter in their hand and a picture of the aircraft as well, and along with a description of what they were doing and where they were flying. For example, the other Friday, I was on the way back to my kids' school, and I had a drone fly over me. So I took a picture of the drone, took a picture of the pilot, their car, and I passed it off on to the enforcement. So you can receive a fine. So you get penalty units, much like the same as here. Each unit's worth a certain amount of money, and you can be fined accordingly. I think it's up to $3,500 for an individual, and up to $10,000 for a corporation or company. So it's still fairly. You do, the person who complains does have to do their due diligence and reporting a incident, and that it will take a long time as well to go through the court system and the bureaucracy.
Not much of a deterrent, really.
No, not really. Yeah, like for P-platers in Australia, if you get caught with your mobile phone, it's loss of licence and a $527 fine. So that's sort of hopefully deterring the younger drivers from not using their phone.
I'm a farmer and I want to move my sheep. I understand there's a drone now that you can sit in your office and push bark. And the sheep will be
That's right, yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, well, like I haven't seen it like physically, but I've read about it. Technically, they shouldn't be flying beyond visual line of sight.
Oh, bullshit.
But yeah, technology is a wonderful
So
thing.
you think that's going to take over the shepherd's job?
I don't think so. Potentially, yeah. But yeah, like somebody said before, how they're going to open the gates if they need to go through the gate.
Oh, you have a spring loaded.
Yeah, I'm sure that's on Wi-Fi as well. Yeah.
Spring-loaded gate to roll.
Any other questions?
Do you think drones have been sold?
Sorry.
But why do they have so much alphabet soup these days with all these letters meaning something? You
Oh.
need to decode to remember what the hell everything, I remember LANK, L-A-A-N-K, or C, sorry.
Yeah.
But
It's a
everything
soft
else,
C,
it just
yeah.
sort of goes past you, doesn't it?
I've got a whole dictionary on like drone abbreviations, cause you could, there's multiple multiple definitions for each abbreviation. It's it gets crazy. Just it's typical aviation, I suppose.
Does,
Do you think drones are being sold to people without them realising the
Absolutely.
regulations?
Absolutely. So
What
cases.
could be done to?
One thing is that supposedly in Australia with the accreditation system is that you need to hold an accreditation before you can fly your drone anywhere. There are exceptions, say if you're an NAAA pilot and you're flying within a CASA approved flying area, then you don't have to, or you hold a higher qualification such as a pilot license of any description. However, it's just like a simple 10 question test that you have to pass before you get your accreditation. It's free, and anybody under 16 has to, in theory, be supervised by an accredited person. I have my doubts on the effectiveness of it. However, it's not my policy. I just do what I'm told.
anybody else?
I hope it was interesting for you, and you learned something, and I managed to sell you some safety and some assurance.
Let's see. So it falls to me as the